couple things stand out, and I want to put our focus on today, on this passage from Judges chapter 4. One is the banality of evil, and the second is the details of God's transforming work. The first verse that Teresa read, the first verse from Judges, the people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. That's a repeated theme again and again throughout Judges, throughout this entire sermon series. You're going to hear it repeated again and again and again and again. I keep saying the word again because that is the picture out of Judges. Sin is like that. And it's banal and not creative and boring. I don't know if you've ever been a big Russian literature fan. I'm a big Dostoevsky fan myself, not so much on Tolstoy. If you've ever read Anna Karenina, I've tried several times, and I could never get through it. I always begin at the very first line. You know, it's a very famous opening line to Anna Karenina. I don't know if you know this line. Tolstoy writes, happy families are all alike. An unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. You know this line? I don't know if that line has always bothered me so much that I could never get through the book, or because the book is like 500 pages and I just decided I didn't ever want to get through it. But I've always found that line to be actually exactly the reverse of what I think is true. Unhappy families are always unhappy in exactly the same ways. Sin manifests itself and breaks down families in always the same ways. The creativity of sin is not very creative. Evil and sin is almost predictably banal and boring. It's not like a vine or a tree that grows up and reaches for the light and wherever the light can be found, sending out branches and vines in different directions so that every tree is unique and special to itself. Sin is just, again, doing what felt right in their eyes, the same thing. Dead trees always end up looking exactly the same, dead, on the ground, rotting away. The destruction that sin produces in our lives always leads to what we have here in verse 3. You notice in verse 3, the people of Israel cried out to the Lord, for Jabin had 900 chariots of iron, and he oppressed the people of Israel cruelly for 20 years. Oppression. Sin always brings this kind of oppression. It's one of the things that's true in societies that are oppressed or in families that are oppressed. You have to hide and always give just the correct line. Whatever the party line is, that's what you have to say. Whether it's true or right or you believe it or not, that's what has to be said. You have to say whatever dad actually thinks, whatever mom wants to do. And creativity, and things moving in different directions and new and spontaneous and delightful directions never really happens because things are oppressed. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who wrote the Gulag Archipelago, he wrote about Soviet Russia that the lie became the only acceptable thing to say. One of his famous quotes from that book, he says, "We know they are lying. They know they are lying. We know they are lying, and we know that they know that they know that we know that they are lying, but they are still lying." Because the lie becomes the only thing that can be said. Lie became the cruel oppression that everyone had to hold to or be sent into the Gulag Archipelago. But sin always does that. It forces everything narrowly down to one point and one place. And in our souls, it forces everything in our life to serve us, to serve myself, to make myself the still point and center of the world and of the world of everyone around me. And if you're going to do that, you have to eliminate everything that might bump you in a new direction or in a new place. Other people in your life, the truth, God Himself. One of my favorite illustrations or images of this is the Dead Sea. I don't know if you know what the Dead Sea is like in Israel, but no water flows out of the Dead Sea. All the water flows into the Dead Sea. It's the lowest point there in Israel. And because of no water flowing out of it, all the water can do there is basically evaporate. And so the oppressive thing of the Dead Sea is salt. The water is highly salinated. There is only one thing in the Dead Sea, and that is salt. There is no life. There's no aquatic life. There's no life growing around the water of the Dead Sea because there's too much salt. Salt is the oppressive reality of the Dead Sea. So everything is still, but nothing is moving, and there is no life. It's lifeless. And sin is like that. It moves everything in our world just to us, where I want to be the center, until I oppress others, until I become oppressed of myself, until I am unable to move. And I can't give life to others, and I end up having less life even in myself. I appreciate what Tim said on Sunday about Jabin here in this passage, that he's the king of Canaan, which is, in other words, a local king. And the implication that he drew from that we are all vulnerable of being oppressed by the internal drive of sin in our life. And so one question is, what is that thing in your life, within you, that keeps coming up again and again and again? Wearing different faces and different guises, but always in the same way, the same banal, non-creative, life-stealing thing. Whether it's pleasure, success, reputation, envy, control, self-pity, or anger, or vanity. All these different ways that are just trying to make myself the center of the world and the still point of everything. Again and again and again, trying to do what was right in my own eyes, and forcing everything just to the exact same direction and location, becoming the Dead Sea. I oppressed, and now I am oppressed myself. That's the first thing to notice here. It stands out in this passage, just the banality of sin. But the second is God's detail in his transforming work. Remember that all throughout Judges, it's not just that the nation of Israel again and again and again does evil in God's sight and does what is right in their own eyes, but also again and again and again, God is at work in miraculous and creative details to provide judges. And every judge is totally different from the judge that came before, totally unique, totally different. And God's at work in these details to provide deliverance, redemption, and change. He is always at work creatively working against the same banal power of sin. Notice in verse 11, we have Heber the Kenite. Who is Heber? Nobody knows. In fact, nobody cares. He's just some random guy in the middle of this passage where all these powerful, significant people are moving. And just one day we are told, Heber, I don't know what happens. We don't give the details. Did he get in a fight with his tribe and these Kenites? We don't know. All we know is that he decided to uproot and move. And notice where it says, far away. He pitched his tent as far away, in other words, from the people that he had been living with, to a whole different area where he thought he was going to get away from everything. Instead, the detail of God's design is that he is exactly right in the mix of everything, very close to the real action of what God is doing to save Israel. And it's not what we would expect. We would expect, as Tim mentioned on Sunday, Barak charging in mightily with a sword to fight everything. And instead, we have God moving years before this ever happens to move Heber and his family to have a tent right in the runaway place that Sisera is going to run to, somewhere where he would feel protected, where he was going to actually meet his doom. And of course, there's a quiet reversal here as well, a picture that this is God's activity, as Tim mentioned before. But one of the pictures of that is that this is a reversal of the fall of humanity. In Genesis chapter 3, it was a lying snake who deceived Eve, a woman, and brought sin and death into the world and oppression into the world. And here God uses now the reversal of that, a woman to deceive an oppressive snake of a man so that he might free his people from death and from oppression. It's poetic. It's creative. It's beautiful. It has God's fingerprints on it. So not only looking this Lenten season about what are the Jabins in my soul that I am drawn to make myself the center of the world, but also what is and has God been doing in the details of your life to bring deliverance, to be at work against the Jabins in your own soul. Can you see how God has used the smallest details to put you in places and to bring people into your life that you did not know, that you did not expect, where you would actually experience his grace and deliverance? Here's one story from my life. When I was in about 13 years old, we moved from living with my grandmother in Kansas to move out to rural Kansas. Acres, out by a lake. Wonderful. I thought it was so great. We were free to be out in the country and run around and doing great stuff. And I was homeschooled, and my parents intended me to be homeschooled all the way through high school, I think is what their plan was. And while we got everything established at our new house out in the country, the phone company gave our family the wrong phone number by 1 digit. They messed up 1 digit when they gave us the number. And when we realized that, we called this phone number, and we ended up finding out that a friend that we had when we were much younger and had lost track of had moved into the same area, and that phone number was their phone number. And we got connected with them again, and it was right at the time when this guy happened to be a teacher at a Christian private school in Topeka, and happened to be the exact person when my parents were saying, I don't know if we should be able to homeschool this guy all the way through high school. What are our other options? Here was this person that we got reconnected with that set me on a whole different trajectory that I was not expecting in my life. Where I went to a Christian school and I got exposed to different kinds of churches. I got exposed to church history. I got exposed to pastoral ministry. I felt a call to ministry that led me to go to seminary, that led me to be here in Austin, Texas. Never in my wildest imaginations, when I was growing up in rural Kansas, did I ever imagine that I would be living in Texas, let alone Austin, Texas. And yet that one small detail, some person that nobody even knows, a Heber, the Kenite, wrote the wrong number on some paper somewhere that God used to set me and my life and my family in a totally different direction, to be changed and transformed by this place, by the people here, by you, to be made more like Jesus, to be transformed. So what are God's details in your life? Do you see his hand of deliverance in the details? And perhaps right now you cannot see them, but Lord willing, you'll be able to look back and you will see them. Because no one looked at Jesus being crucified on a cross, on a trash heap, outside of Jerusalem, on the outskirts of some small podunk town, on the outskirts of the Roman Empire, that nobody knew about, seemed an insignificant detail, but how would they have ever imagined what seemed like a small, meaningless detail would actually be the start of the end of the Roman Empire and the oppression of the Roman Empire? That small thing would become the very thing that has led you to sit here in this pew in Austin, Texas today, thousands of years later. And here we have a cross right here, a little mimicking of that reality of thousands of years ago. What seemed like failure was actually the smallest bit of yeast put into flour to transform that flour into a loaf of bread, to transform the world until it is totally remade by Christ's reign forever in the new heavens and the new earth. Notice in verse 23 here at the end. On that day, God subdued Jabin, the king of Canaan, before the people of Israel. Well, what day? The day that Sisera got the spike nailed through his head. Jabin, verse 24, Jabin isn't gone, but the power of Jabin has been destroyed. God has already subdued the power of Jabin. The cross was the stake into the skull of Satan and sin and death. Now, all that is left for us, and what we do here especially attend to in the season of Lent, is verse 24, to keep pressing on. The people of Israel pressed harder and harder against Jabin, the king of the Canaanites, to press on in the power of Christ until the power of the Jabins in our lives and souls are totally gone. So use this Lenten season to do that work in your soul, to press on, to see what we are drawn to fall back into again and again and recognize it as the same, trying to make ourselves the center of the world, and then look for God's details of provision and deliverance and grace, and follow him in gratitude for those things, and press on with the help of Christ until the power of Jabin is destroyed in your very soul. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.